They measured the year by frost lines on the clapboards and the height of wood piles against a wall that remembered other winters. In this part of Vermont, precision felt like prayer. Milk scalded at dawn until the steam rose in disciplined ropes. Axes returned to the same notch on the same beam, their edges oiled as if they were mouths to be fed. Ledger books breathed in and out with the week, a Sabbath-long exhale where some stood still and men put ink away like knives. Counting was not greed, it was shelter, as if numbers once balanced would lay themselves between the town and the wolves. On a Sunday that carried the brittle music of sleigh bells, the child came into the arithmetic with no column to stand in. He was all edges and hush. He did not take to a name, and so names took to him, a snow of guesses. Ephraim, Jonah, boy. He ate little, the careful way a flame eats air. He slept less, a kind of wakefulness that didn't agitate so much as listen. When the farmer's wife asked, "Who do you belong to?" he turned toward the black line of spruce, as if the trees had a ledger he might fit into. "He don't ask for anything," the farmer said that evening, smoothing a palm along the table's scars. "Not even water." The midwife, who had come to make sure he was not dying, murmured, "Want makes us legible? What is a soul without a hunger you can see?" The town adjusted to him the way a coat learns a shoulder. They counted him, too, in the ways small places do. An extra spoon set without comment, a quilt folded and left at the end of a bed, just in case. Glances traded across prayer like small, warm contraband. Even the pastor's benediction seemed to lengthen at the edges, to make room for a presence that would not be gathered by words. At the general store, under a ceiling the color of smoke, men offered theories as one might lay down cards. "Left by travelers too proud to beg," said Mr. Fielding, a man who stacked flour with an officer's precision. "Left by someone counting more than we can," said the clerk, tapping his pen against his ledger as if the ink could overhear. The schoolmaster stepped in, gloves tucked under his arm. "We'll teach him letters. If there's sense in him, ink will find it." "And if there ain't?" asked the blacksmith, eyes bright from the forge. "Then we'll mark him as we mark bad iron." The schoolmaster tilted his head. "Not bad, other." Outside, the sky folded itself into blue iron. Chickens hesitated on the threshold of their coop, unsure of night's intentions. In the farmhouse, the child stood at the window and watched the invisible river of air move the spruce, as if weather was spelling something in a script older than breath. "I dreamed he was standing at the foot of the bed," the farmer's wife whispered later, candlelight softening the fear into something like awe. "I said, 'What do you want?' and he lifted his hand and pointed to the wall. Not at the cross, at the space next to it." The farmer stared at the cross nails blackened where smoke loved to linger. "Maybe he wants what we don't hang." "What's that?" she asked. He shook his head. "I don't know the name." In the meeting house, the pastor tried to fold the boy into a comfort people could carry home. "Children are given for our instruction," he said, palms open, voice patient as snowfall. "We are to correct and to console, to count what can be counted, and to trust God for the rest." Afterward, outside in the crisp snap of late afternoon, the doctor from Burlington, visiting a cousin and always listening for anomalies, remarked, "Your records here are thorough." The clerk smiled without warmth. "We keep a good book. Births, deaths, deeds." "And the boy?" the doctor asked. The clerk glanced toward the farmhouse on the hill, a black square in the white. "Provisional," he said, "pending." Night arrived the way a verdict does, not quickly, but without appeal. The child lay on the pallet set near the hearth. The farmer's wife pulled a quilt over him stitched with broken stars and remembered hands. She expected him to grasp the edge the way most children do, to anchor himself to the fabric of the world. He did not. He let the quilt own its weight and watched the shadows from the fire climb the wall like tall, thin men ascending a long set of stairs. "What is truth?" the schoolmaster would write in his journal that week, the black nib leaving a small pool at the question mark. Is it a sum we arrive at together, a consensus that becomes real because it is agreed upon, or does it exist where our pens cannot go, in the quiet at the window in the line of spruce? On the seventh day, the town balanced its columns. set its axes, scalded its milk until it sang. The boy stood at the window and did not blink. A clock on the mantel ticked as if counting not time but attention. When the latch lifted, he did not turn. He raised his small hand and pointed to a space no one else could see. "Do some things exist only because we believe in them?" the pastor would ask. Later, half to himself. Or do they exist, and belief is only our way of learning their shape? The snow outside held every footprint briefly, then let them go. Even memory knew there were limits to keeping. Even this town that counted everything felt the first tug toward what could not be numbered. Spring did not rush the valley. It unbuttoned itself slowly, one damp afternoon at a time, as if ashamed of its own tenderness. The river loosened its iron language and began to speak in low, wet cursive around the stones. Fence posts showed their knuckles. A lean fox, winter's catechism still in its bones, paused at a ditch to drink the news and moved on. On the morning the farmer found the bundle. The yard was a chest of damp wood and untrustworthy shadows. The woolen shawl lay by the woodpile, both soaked and smelling faintly of iron and river ice. The knots had been tied with a sailor's care, no vanity, no waste. Ash freckled the edges as if flame had flirted with the fabric, then changed its mind. The farmer crouched, knees creaking like old doors, and set his palm on the bundle the way one feels for life in a log just split. The weight startled him, light, map-light, as if the bulk were made of lines, not flesh. He untied the knot. The child looked up at him, eyes the color of the lake when it decides to be serious. "Mercy," the farmer said. "A prayer more than a word. Who sets a boy by a woodpile?" He lifted the boy and something slid against his fingers, a slip of paper. On it 3 inked tally marks. No name, no plea. Only those short vertical strokes and a small smudge of wax where a seal might have been, if a seal could be made without letters. "What's the mark?" she asked, leaning toward the paper with the respect superstition demands. She squinted. "It means already accounted for." He shook his head. "It means return to sender." They brought him inside, into rooms that smelled of yeast and the good, clean exhaustion of a working week. The kettle breathed. Floorboards told their familiar creaks, like old men repeating the same jokes but softer now. On the table, the tally marks lay in the lamp's circle, the smallest fence ever built. The midwife arrived, cheeks pinked by the thaw wind, basket filled with useful tenderness, chamomile, linen, a stubborn watch, a narrower compassion than the pastor's but deeper. "We didn't see," said the farmer's wife. "He was where the wood should be." The midwife pressed 2 fingers to the child's wrist. Nothing. 2 to the throat. A vibration far off, like a horse crossing a wooden bridge no one else could find. "His pulse is elsewhere," she said, immediately ashamed of the sentence. "Forgive me, I mean it isn't where I expect." The boy tolerated her fingers, her firm kindness. He did not reach for the cup she offered, but when she tipped it slightly, a bead of water rolled to his lip and vanished. Reflex obeyed where desire did not. "Where's the note?" she asked. The farmer placed it in her palm. 3 marks, she murmured. A clerk's habit, or a warning. A schooled hand? The schoolmaster ventured from the doorway. He'd arrived on the excuse of returning a borrowed almanac which lay dry and patient under his arm. "They're straight, unhurried." "A deliberate leaving then," the farmer's wife said. "Not panic." The schoolmaster stepped closer to the boy. "Can you tell us where you came from?" The boy's eyes moved, not to the faces, but to the seam where the wall met the ceiling. He watched that thin joining as if it were a river mouth. "Does he understand?" the farmer asked. "He understands," the midwife said, surprising herself. "He just declines." Night fell like a decision made on your behalf. Fog braided itself through the orchard and pressed its forehead against the glass. Mice, bolder at thaw, clicked faint congratulations behind the wainscot. The boy slept with his eyes not entirely closed, as if he feared to lose the thing he watched in waking. The farmer dreamed of a room with no corners, just endless joining, wall to ceiling to floor to wall again, seam upon seam without a place to stop. When he woke, the tally marks lay on the table like a commandment no one could pass. At breakfast, eggs tasted of the pan's old religion. The pastor came to the door, hat in his hand, coat too thin for morning's bite. The farmer told him what there was to tell. And the mark? The pastor asked, looking not at the paper but at the boy, who stared at the steam lifting from the porridge as if watching a small cloud remember something and return to tell it. It suggests he has been considered, the pastor said, careful with his adjectives. By whom? The farmer's wife asked. The pastor didn't answer. Do some things become true because we write them down? He glanced toward the shelf where the family Bible sat, births tucked on a ribbon like birds strung for winter. Or do we write them down because we are afraid of their reluctance to be known? The schoolmaster, who had stayed too long and knew it, said quietly, "We think discovery clarifies. Often the first thing we discover is a failure of our vocabulary." The child lifted his small hand and pointed not to the door, not to the fire, not to any of them, but to a place in the air as blank as a field after shearing. He held it there, small and steady, as if indicating where a sound would be if sound could be asked to arrive. They watched his finger the way sailors watch a distant light. It did not move. It did not mean anything they could prove. They were left with the tally marks and a hunger they could not name. The midwife kept a ledger that smelled faintly of peppermint and grief. Between the weight of births and the feathered script of deaths, she had learned to lace her heart like a boot, tight enough to walk far in. Not so tight the blood grew mean. When the boy came, she sharpened her pencil as if the point could hold what the days would not. She set her basket by the hearth, her hands by the child. Fingers first to the wrist, empty, then to the throat, vibration like a message traveling by plank. She did not say impossible. Impossible is a word doctors owe. She said, "We will cook a broth, and we will warm his feet, and we will make another attempt." "Does he feel pain?" the farmer's wife asked, cautious as if the answer might insult someone she could not see. The midwife pinched the soft inside of the boy's arm. He blinked slowly, as if the pinch had to be walked to him from far away. "Pain arrives," she said, "only delayed." They moved him near the hearth where old fire gossip lingered, crackle of winters past, the grammar of heat. The midwife held a mirror before his mouth. Nothing, no soft frost of claim on the glass. She held it longer, her arm beginning to ache. The glass stayed clear, as if refusing to bear witness. "Breath without breath," she murmured. "Speak plain," the farmer said, not unkindly. It was the voice of a man who had met blizzards and debt and preferred his enemies named. She placed the mirror on the mantel where it watched the room, and learned to be a wall. "I have delivered 41, buried 10, she said, eyes on the boy. "I have seen breath that came too early and breath that would not be persuaded to stay. He is neither. He is consistent without being convincing." The boy's eyes followed the shape of a coal, as it surrendered its red and turned to idea. The room felt to her like a church emptied after a funeral. The wood still humming, the air yet to choose a new subject. In her ledger that evening she wrote anomalous, then hesitated. Beside the word she drew a small drifting line where a name would be. It looked like the path left by a child's finger in frost. Her husband, a man of few words who loved her enough to be comfortable with them, poured a measure of brandy into a blue cup. "Hard day?" he asked. She sipped and winced. "The world asked me a question it had no intention of answering." He nodded, roster of sheep in his head like prayer beads. "What do you think he is?" "A boy," she said too quickly, then softer. "A question." "Questions have fathers," he said gently, "and mothers." She turned the page. Not always. That night she dreamed her hands were gloves worn by another set of hands, thin, chilly, precise. They moved her fingers to the boy's throat, pressed and then guided her away, as if to say, "You may look, you may not enter." At dawn she returned to the farmhouse with a small vial of laudanum and a larger vial of hope. She offered neither. Instead she sat, and the farmer's wife sat, and the house breathed. The boy watched the seam again, that place where the room's ideas were stitched together. The midwife considered the seam as if it were a wound on the world's body. "Can science ever explain the soul?" she asked, not expecting the farmer's wife to answer. I don't know, the woman said. I sometimes think the soul is only that which refuses to be measured. Someone used to sit there, the farmer's wife said, eyes wet, voice a room she didn't want visited. My mother, the midwife, who believed in kindness more than in God but knew which words did what, said, then he remembers comfort. Poor, the farmer said from the doorway, quiet as snow. Comfort remembers him. I have no name for what he is. I can tell you what he isn't. He isn't dead. He isn't exactly alive the way we are. He occupies like weather, occupies. If truth requires witnesses, I have only my hands to offer, and they have not been admitted. Forgive me, or don't. I cannot be persuaded to lie. She didn't write it on paper. Some ledgers would not hold ink. The schoolhouse had the smell of chalk and wool and the administrative hope that children's heads would surrender. Slates leaned against benches like small, compliant gravestones. On the far wall, in looping confidence, the alphabet marched and then sat down. Today, the schoolmaster told the class, is a day for sums. Every day's a day for sums, a boy in the back muttered, his voice a pocket knife. The child arrived as a shadow enters a room, noticed only because the light shifts around it. Bare feet. Quiet enough that the schoolmaster looked up not at a sound, but at the lack of appropriate sounds. No shy cough, no door's complaint. He pointed to an empty bench. The boy chose another, a bench no one ever sat on because it wobbled. He put his palms on the wood as if assessing grain. Name? The schoolmaster asked, stick idling in his fingers. The boy watched the stick as if it were a small animal. He did not answer. We'll call you. No, the boy said, so gently that the class breathed as one animal. Startled. It was not refusal as much as a smooth removal of the need for a name. You can write? The schoolmaster asked, managing a neutral tone the way a tightrope manages dignity. The boy lifted the chalk. It looked heavy in his hand. Write your letters, the schoolmaster said. Any letters? The chalk touched the slate and moved with a certainty borrowed from elsewhere. Not letters. Not at first. Numbers. The column of dates. Then the column of degrees. Cold to less cold. Their decline exact, like a stair built for angels. Between the columns he drew a thin dividing line, the way a river divides counties that never agreed to it. Today's lesson is diverted, the schoolmaster announced to the class, though it was himself he addressed. He stood behind the boy and watched the hand. The script was plain and correct. No flourish. Skill often shows off. This did not. During recess, when the room filled with left-behind noise and the particular ache of benches relieved, a sum appeared on the board. The schoolmaster would have sworn to a justice that he had not put it there. The numbers equaled time. He checked his pocket watch. The sum arrived at 2:13. The rain began on the roof. With that suddenness rain reserves for dry wood. The children shouted and clapped as if the sky had performed on cue. The boy stood under the eaves after dismissal and tilted his face up, not to be washed but to be confirmed. You think you can predict weather? The schoolmaster asked, standing beside him under a gutter that had never kept its promise. The boy spoke without turning. No. What then? I remember it. From when? The schoolmaster could hear the tremor in his own voice, a small embarrassment. The boy's eyes followed a single drop as it formed, fattened, and fell. From when it was decided. Later in his journal, the leather smelling of ideas and regret. The schoolmaster wrote, he does not learn, he recalls. But from where? The tone of his arithmetic is not hungry. It is witness. The next day, the boy arrived and drew the map of the county's rivers in chalk. Not as a child copies a map, but as an old surveyor closes his eyes to remember his own work. He drew a small X at a bend not on any school chart. There, he said, so quietly that the chalk almost didn't transmit it. There what? The schoolmaster asked. He waited. The boy did not answer. He did not look toward the wobbly bench this time. He looked at the doorframe. Do some things exist only because we believe in them? The schoolmaster asked him, confiding more than instructing. The boy touched the frame at a height the schoolmaster recognized with a little nausea. The exact mark he had made with a child long buried, a chalk line to measure a birthday growth spurt. The line had long been rubbed into the wood by dust and season, but the boy's fingers found it the way a tongue finds a missing tooth. The schoolmaster put the chalk down with the care of a man laying a child into a crib. "Have you been here before?" The boy said nothing, which is an answer stories sometimes prefer. A girl raised her hand, then let it fall. She dreamed the boy last night, standing by the river where the birches conceal and reveal in equal measure. In the dream he carried a lantern that made no light. "Speak," the schoolmaster told her, seeing her retreat. "Even if you're afraid to be wrong." "I dreamed he was counting," she said, eyes on the floor, but not numbers. "What was he counting?" he asked. "Decisions," she whispered. The room felt suddenly too small to contain such a thing. He dismissed the class and stood alone at the front, rain easing into a softer logic on the roof. He looked at the slate where the sum had been, at the door frame where the absent line still argued its existence, and felt the first honest ache of not being the smartest person in the building. He thought of science, which he loved, and wondered if what we cherish can also be what blinds us. When he locked the schoolhouse that night, he ran his palm along the frame, then left his hand there longer than necessary, as if asking the wood to confess. It did not. The river's imagined X marked the place in him that could not be taught. He arrived from Burlington with a leather case that clicked like propriety. His hair was unreasonably neat for a road this muddy. In the farmer's kitchen, where a kettle sang low and a cat watched the cold from a respectful distance, the doctor arranged his instruments with the ceremony a priest reserves for bread. "Dr. Ainsworth," he said, as if the name itself were a treatment. "I've come at the request of," he gestured vaguely toward the world, which is sometimes how city men include villages in their vocabulary. He placed a stethoscope to the boy's chest and frowned. The frown was not fear. Fear is too intimate. It was offended curiosity. He tapped the boy's knee with a small hammer. A polite kick. He shone lamplight into the eyes. The pupils considered and adjusted, not slow, not fast, as if courtesy governed reflex. "Family history?" he asked the farmer. "We're the family," the farmer said, with the brittle pride of someone who knows the law and mercy don't always share a house. "Age?" the doctor asked, turning to the boy. The boy did not answer. Dr. Ainsworth's pen moved. Speech limited, he wrote as if ink could persuade the mouth. He pressed 2 fingers to the wrist. Nothing. 2 to the throat. There again, that far horse crossing. He removed his hand as if it had been burned by the absence. He adjusted. Recovered. Profession. "Perhaps a conduction anomaly," he said, drawing a small thoracic map. Arrows everywhere, his pen nib biting at the paper in a hurry to be right. "What is that?" the farmer's wife asked. "Something misdirected," he replied, regretting the word as soon as it left. "I mean only that signals travel strangely. The heart is a drum. Some drums are muffled." "Muffled," she repeated, tasting the medical word until it became domestic. "Like a quilt over a clock." The doctor glanced up, irritated at the accuracy embedded in the poetry. "Does he eat?" he asked. "He eats when food is offered," she said, "not when asked." "Sleep?" "He lies down when he is tired," she said. "But I don't think he gives himself to sleep. I think sleep comes and sits with him." The doctor looked at the boy, who had fixed his gaze on the doctor's watch chain. He watched the small gold links as if they were a procession. "What is your name?" Dr. Ainsworth asked, moving the conversation to firmer ground. The boy glanced at the tally marks folded on the shelf as if names were a currency he had not been issued. "Science can explain much," the doctor said, addressing the room now as men with training sometimes do when they forget the audience is composed of people and not questions. "Given time." "And what if time is only a habit?" the farmer asked, surprised at himself for saying it aloud. "Then we would explain the habit," Dr. Ainsworth said, with a smile that looked like a sketch of a smile. He packed his case with the slight haste of someone who has not failed exactly but has not succeeded either, and that grey space is intolerable to a certain kind of mind. "Is he well?" the farmer's wife asked, because that is the question that empties all the others of their importance. "He is consistent," the doctor said too quickly. "Not the same," she replied, a sentence that hung in the room like a bell still ringing after the hand that struck it has gone still. He stepped outside into the chlorophyll smell of thaw, the road holding his boot with the familiar greed of spring. The farmer followed, as men do when they are not ready to let expertise leave the yard. "You see cases," the farmer said. "Perhaps he is a case." "Everything is a case," Dr. Ainsworth said. "Which is to say, everything admits to pattern." "And if it does not admit?" the farmer asked. The doctor adjusted his hat. "Then the pattern has not yet been understood." They stood, the two of them, as distant church bells traded their certainty across the valley. The doctor thought of Burlington's clean rooms and shelves that held knowledge dressed in identical bindings. He thought of the sisters in their corridors of order. He thought of a boy with no pulse where pulses ought to be, and a room that had refused to be converted into a case. "Can science ever explain the soul?" the farmer asked, softly, as if the question were rhetorical and the sky blue as a healed bruise might answer. "Science does not acknowledge the soul," Dr. Ainsworth said, then blushed at the emptiness that confessed. "Science explains what can be replicated, and what of what happens only once?" the farmer asked. "Then we await the second occurrence," the doctor said, aiming for humor and missing. He left with measurements and sketches and the peculiar guilt of a man who has made careful notes on a mystery he has not altered. In his case, between steel and glass, his pencil rattled like a small regret. Inside, the boy returned his gaze to the window, and the seam and the way light made a theology out of dust. The cat, deciding finally to accept him, jumped into his lap like a surrender. Order arrived on low shoes and folded blankets, at the hour when women make sense of a day by making lists. The parish women came with a softer kind of law, the kind that tucks hair behind ears and calls it mercy. They brought wool that had known other winters, a jar of jam with a frayed ribbon, and the collected authority of kitchens. "He must be placed," said Mrs. Larkin, whose hands made everything look like it had a plan. "Children need walls that promise." "Sisters in Burlington," added Mrs. Crane, eyes bright with the zeal of solution. "Their ledger is an ark. They bring order to the wandering." The farmer's wife folded and refolded a blanket until it remembered someone else's body. She was polite in that way country women can be. Unhurry, unyielding. "He is placed," she said, "for now." Mrs. Larkin's smile was arched like a bridge. "A house is one thing, an institution is another." The pastor arrived, hat damp with moving weather. He joined the choreography without complaint. "Order," he said, "is a kindness we can offer when love is uncertain." The schoolmaster stood by the door, uncertain which part of him had come. The one that loved syllables, the one that loved children, or the one that loved questions more than either. "Names bring accountability," Mrs. Crane added. She had a sister who had a cousin who had once been taken in by sisters, and this made her an expert. "We can give him a name," the pastor said, gently. "No," the boy said, his voice not disobedient, only true. The pastor's mouth softened. "We will give him a name for our books," he said, perhaps to himself. They lifted the boy carefully, as if the weight might offend, and he watched not the hands that held him, but the clock on the mantel. It ticked like an insect. He counted, they would say later. He always counted, though no one ever caught him with numbers in his mouth. They set him on the wagon. The iron wheel groaned its old song. The boy turned his face toward the church. The bell tower threw shadow upon the yard, like the finger of a stern ancestor. His eyes rested on the bell as if memorizing its hour. Not because he feared the new routine, but because he intended to meet it precisely. "Do some things exist only because we believe in them?" the schoolmaster asked the pastor as they walked behind the wagon, their boots discussing mud. "What things?" the pastor asked. "Institutions," the schoolmaster said. "Walls, ledgers. They exist to make belief bear weight," the pastor replied. "Faith requires scaffolding. And if the scaffolding is mistaken for the church?" the schoolmaster asked. "Then the church is in danger," the pastor said, quietly. As they approached the crest where the road decided which town you belonged to, the farmer put his hand on the boy's shoulder. It was the lightest touch. He did not ask for anything in return. The boy tilted his head toward the touch, like a plant considers sun. At the crossroads, Mrs. Larkin adjusted the boy's shawl as if to reassert the narrative. "The sisters will sort it," she said. "They have rules that have saved worse." "Saved?" the farmer's wife asked. "Yes," Mrs. Larkin said, "by which I mean accounted for. In Burlington, order was an architecture. Corridors that taught the feet to whisper, bells that firmed ours into obedience. The sisters knew each child the way shepherds know their sheep, by gait, by appetite, by the slope of the head when listening. They filed names into lines that cut chaos into pieces, small enough to bless. But as the wagon rolled forward, the wind lifted the hem of the shawl and revealed, not skin, not scar, but a small chalk mark on the boy's wrist, as if someone had measured something that refused to be measured and had settled for a line instead. The schoolmaster reached, then snatched his hand back before touch could make him guilty. "Someone marked him," he said. "Everyone marks what they do not understand," the pastor answered. "We call it care." Night was not far behind them. The spruce stood like hired men along the ridge. A hawk made a slow, uninterested circle, as if death's attention were not yet due. The boy watched the sky's glamour tighten into evening and did not weep. At the edge of town, where the road became honest and stopped trying to be anything else, the farmer's wife leaned close to his ear. "You can come back," she said, "even if only in your looking." He turned his face toward the line where field becomes wood, and in the glass of his eyes the parish women saw something neither wall nor ledger could hold. They shivered as if someone had walked over their graves and then scolded themselves for superstition, which is another kind of ledger. Order, like bread, is a daily miracle. It fills the house with a smell that means morning. It arranges and believes itself good because it is often. But there are lives that exist at an angle to mercy, lives that refuse to be organized even by love. They rode toward the sisters because riding toward solutions is what people do when the world asks its larger questions. The boy counted the slow syllables of the bell, then closed his eyes like a man agreeing to listen. Stories rise from wet ground the way fog does, quietly, and then suddenly everything has edges you cannot trust. After the boy, talk took on the sheen of secrecy even when shouted across fences. The valley became a throat that kept clearing itself to sing a song it couldn't remember. At the mill, where water had its own governance, a man swore he saw the boy on the footbridge, holding a piece of slate as if it were a prayer book. He spoke, the man said, hands shaking in mug and memory, and the river slowed. "Rivers don't obey boys," the blacksmith replied, though he did not smile when he said it. "At the same moment," said Mrs. Talbot, who saw what needed seeing, "I saw him at the schoolhouse standing in a doorway that wasn't there." "Impossible," her sister said. "Not impossible," Mrs. Talbot said, "only impolite. An old woman from Albany. It was unclear why she'd come, but some women move through towns like warnings, sat by the stove in the general store and stitched words into other words. There are families," she said, "who carry a circle instead of a line. Don't laugh. Some blood does not travel, it returns." "What returns?" the clerk asked, feigning disinterest with the rigor of a man refusing to be converted. "Questions," the woman said, "and debts." She told a story of a house that hummed grief through its floorboards, a sound you couldn't locate and couldn't stop. "It's not the house," she said. "It's the name the house learned. Names trap. Names release. Be careful." "We've given him no name," the schoolmaster said from a corner, ashamed at the pride prickling his sentence. The old woman's eyes were pale and exact. "Then you have given him many." On certain evenings, foxes came too close to porches and lingered, staring like men who had come for a reason and lost it. Owls called with a kind of punctuation you couldn't pass. In barns, horses put their heads together and breathed the same breath as if agreeing not to betray what they had seen. At a quilting where hands find courage in the refuge of busyness, Mrs. Larkin whispered, "My sister dreamt he stood at the foot of her bed. He said, 'I am an accounting.'" She pricked her finger and watched the bead of blood fatten into complaint. I asked of what. He pointed to the window. There was nothing there. "A witching," someone breathed. No, said the midwife, who disliked large words when small ones would hold. A haunting, not of a house, of a ledger. The pastor, when told of these strands, gathered them as a man gathers twigs, carefully, knowing how small things start large fires. We must be tender, he said from the pulpit, to the boy and to ourselves. The tongue is a knife we have not learned to use without injury. But after service he stood in the churchyard among stones that wore lichen like patient grief and confided to the schoolmaster. I am not immune to story. I dreamed of him too. What did he do? The schoolmaster asked. He stood in the aisle and counted to 3, the pastor said, but slowly like years. The schoolmaster exhaled. 3 tally marks, he said, on a page with no words. Do some things exist only because we believe in them? The pastor asked. Most do, the schoolmaster replied, but some exist despite us. Rumor is a creature with 100 hands. It can be instructed. Sometimes it can be scolded into manners, but if it finds a house that answers back, it will linger at that threshold forever, scratching softly even after the door has been moved. The boy had become the rumor's home, not because he asked for it, but because he refused to remedy it. He did not correct, he did not bless. He passed through rooms and the air behind him took a little longer to settle. When the old woman from Albany left, she pressed a coin into the schoolmaster's palm. When he unfolded his hand, he did not find a coin. He found a circle of thick thread. For sewing, he asked. For reminding, she said. Of what? That lines can close without ending, she said, and walked away without turning. That night, a woman who had lost 3 infants in 3 winters stood on her porch and looked toward the farm where the boy slept. Let him be a question someone else answers, she said into an air that felt suddenly not empty at all. The spruce didn't move. Or perhaps they moved and chose not to let her see. In the dark, under the careful indifference of stars, a child turned, sat up and stared at the seam where room became sky. He arrived with summer's first dust, a small man with a large hat, dragging a trunk that sounded like it contained more promises than objects. He called himself Professor Bellamy, which is what men call themselves when they require titles to keep their dignity upright. He rented a field from Miss Fielding and raised a tent the color of old bruises. Gas lamps hissed at the entrance like well-trained serpents. Animal magnetism, he cried to a crowd hungry for mystery and entertainment in equal measure. The correction of the unseen. The adjustment of your private compass to the world's true pole. The schoolmaster went because he disliked what he called fraud performed impudently, and because he could not stay away. The midwife went because she was too honest to let her contempt go unexamined. The farmer's wife went because her heart wanted to be shown a trick it could live with. The pastor went because shepherds accompany their sheep even to foolishness. The boy went because the world was near. Inside, velvet swallowed sound. Brass instruments gleamed as if reflecting a better class of truth. Professor Bellamy arranged glass rods upon a table, drew circles with an ivory wand. You, sir, he said, pointing to the schoolmaster. A sturdy mind. Join me. The schoolmaster did, cheeks disloyally hot. Hold these, the professor said, placing rods in the boy's hands instead, pivoting like a man who has seen a finer mark. Yes, the child. Better. Purity, ladies and gentlemen, is a conductor. He passed his hands over the boy's head and arms, fingers barely stirring the fabric of air, as if smoothing an invisible wrinkled sheet. You feel the current, he asked. The boy said nothing. The crowd swayed forward, which is a kind of believing. Sleep, the professor commanded, snapping his fingers with a flourish taught in cities. The boy's eyelids lowered. He looked not asleep, but closed. Now, the professor said, his voice honeyed with triumph. We shall ask the ether to confess. He leaned close. Child, what is under this tent? He asked, expecting parlor answers, coins and cards, secrets and sins. He expected that if he aimed the question poorly, the audience would answer for him. The boy spoke in a level tone that allowed no performance to land. Cloth, splinters, 27 nails, 1 stone that is cracked, but not yet broken, 3 moths. A woman who forgot to be afraid. A man who wishes to be believed. Laughter, loud, protective, eyes in the front row quickened and then calmed, like deer that realize the hunter has misfired. The professor, rouge darkening on his cheekbones, waved a hand to paint away the accuracy. Suggestion, he declared. He is suggestible, very common. We proceed. He instructed the boy to raise his left hand. The boy raised his right. He commanded him to count backward. The boy counted forward. But in another language, the old numbers people whisper to babies in the cradle before they remember English. Fraud. Someone shouted, defending himself. Show us something real, someone else challenged, which is the cruelest request we ever make of a life we are unprepared to understand. The professor performed a deck of cards. A vanishing coin. The old newspaper trick. People applauded in relief. Outside, the night breathed the cool of events that did not require an audience. When the crowd thinned, the schoolmaster and the midwife stood near the stone the boy had named. It does look tired, the midwife said, touching the grey flank of it with the back of her fingers, the way one touches a fevered infant. But all stones look tired. The schoolmaster crouched. The hairline fissure traced a delicate thread along the face. He pressed his nail to it. The stone withheld. He stood. I do not want to be fooled, he said. Then don't go to tents, she replied. And yet, he said, voice thin with a feeling like shame, when he speaks the world adjusts. Do some things exist only because we believe in them? The midwife asked. I think some exist because they insist, he said. 2 nights later, a cold front walked down from the north like a stern aunt and laid a hand on the field. The stone split with a sound that made people look up from their plates. Some blamed the weather. Some blamed the professor, who had already moved on, trunk rattling like misplaced applause. A few blamed the boy, because blame is a tool that fits every hand. The pastor, when told, closed his eyes. We have asked the wrong questions, he said. It is not what is he doing to us, but what are we doing to him? In his sleep, the boy murmured a word that sounded like no word, and every word. The farmer's wife leaned over him and did not try to own it. She let it pass through the room, and out under the eaves, where moths rehearsed their suicide against the lamps. The tent's trampled grass forgot its shape and then relearned it. The stone lay in 2 clean thoughts. The county clerk loved his book the way some men love their first plough. He admired its obedience. The pages were thick and practical. The binding had been repaired twice, the stitches of visible honesty down the spine. He wrote with a pen that took its time, and his ink had the gravity of decisions. He had entered births in joy and in anger, had recorded deaths in the same 2 lights. He had written deeds that moved land from one man's hope to another's debt, and the book had kept itself equal. Then came the boy. Name? The clerk asked, out of habit. None yet, the schoolmaster said, standing as if he were applying to adopt an uncooperative word. The clerk nodded. Parentage? Unknown. Date of arrival? The schoolmaster said, then added, apologetic. March 17th, perhaps the 16th. The clerk dipped his pen. He allowed himself a small sigh. We prefer precision, he said, though he did not mean to scold. He set the nib to the page. The book took the ink as it had done for years, until the nib crossed a fold he had not noticed. The paper bled along a seam, a scar of a tear mended long ago. The clerk lifted the page to the window. Light went through where it should not. He belongs where the book breaks, he said, and startled at hearing his own thought out loud. What? The schoolmaster asked. Nothing, the clerk said too quickly. He moved to a cleaner square of page. He tried again. The pen balked. The tine spread, whispering outrage. The ink collected in a small black lake that, when it dried, looked like a mouth refusing a spoon. He closed the book gently, as one closes the eyes of someone still breathing. He opened it again to births, filled, honest, to deaths, obedient, somber, to deeds, bossy, complete. He returned to the blank page where the boy would be held and felt the weight of what unrecordable meant. We could create a placeholder, the schoolmaster suggested, tone suggesting he regretted the offer the instant it became air. The clerk nodded. He drew 3 small vertical marks, tidy, equidistant, the language of honest failure. Provisional, he wrote under them. The way a man makes a wound official. A fly explored the sill where varnish had learned to admit sunlight. Outside, a cart argued with a rut and then lost the argument. The clerk closed the book. He pressed his palm to the cover, a posture like prayer, except that he looked at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. Do some things exist only because we write them down? The schoolmaster asked. No, the clerk said, but some things will not exist without being written down to anyone but themselves. He lifted the book to the window again. The light made a private geography of the page. Where the boy would have been, the paper seemed thinner, as if it had been sanded by air. He did not tell the schoolmaster this. He said, instead, the sentence clerks are paid to say, "We will amend when necessary." On his way home, he stopped at the churchyard and walked among stones that had accepted their facts with varying degrees of grace. He touched a name that had once been a boy, who had been a laugh. He told no one that he sometimes spoke to his ledger when alone. "Hold him," he whispered, to a book that would never answer. "Hold him so we can believe we are not cruel." That night, the clerk dreamed the book opened itself and pages uncountable turned, each containing 3 small marks and nothing else, a forest of fence posts with no field to hold. He woke with his hand extended as if to stop a flood. In the farmhouse, the farmer watched his wife sleep and thought of lines, fence lines, ledgers, the chalk line in the schoolhouse doorframe, and how each promised to separate something from something else. The boy slept with his hands open, as if prepared to receive whatever the morning would confess. The wind pushed the window a little and then apologized. The book on the clerk's desk cooled to the temperature of the room. The orphanage sat on a rise, as institutions prefer, where distance enforces respect. Its bricks had the clean posture of certainty. Inside, the corridor taught the feet how to behave. Bells protocoled the day: waking, washing, prayer, work, prayer, instruction, prayer, bread, bed. Order draped itself over the hours like a nun's veil. Sister Genevieve received the boy with practiced gravity. She had a mouth made for mercy and eyes that measured the difference between intention and result. She held out a wash basin that reflected ceiling and child, and the unresolved ceiling of the child. "We have a name for him," she told the pastor, "because papers require obedience even when hearts do not." Thomas. No, the boy. The year turned, and with it came the talk of trains. Long, iron sentences written across the land, carrying children from cities to farms, from anonymity to provisional belonging. The orphan train movement had not yet reached full steam in Vermont, but the idea had arrived early, like a rumor that precedes its own truth. In parlors and depots, people spoke of salvation on a schedule, of names arriving like parcels, of pasts trimmed to fit new homes. The sisters at St. Joseph's began preparing folding linens with the precision of hope, teaching children how to smile in ways that could be received. The boy, Thomas, as the ledger now insisted, watched the preparations without comment. He did not resist. He did not comply. He simply observed, as if the world were a play he had already seen, and was curious only about the staging. "He doesn't ask where the train goes," Sister Genevieve said, folding a shirt that had belonged to a boy who had since been renamed. "He asks when it leaves." "Does he want to go?" the pastor asked. "He doesn't want," she said. "He waits." The boy stood at the edge of the platform one morning, watching a train arrive. Children disembarked, blinking like new animals. Some cried, some clung. One girl looked at him and whispered, "You're not one of us." He nodded, not in agreement but in recognition. Later the schoolmaster visited, bringing books and a question he could not phrase. He found the boy in the corridor, tracing a line along the wall with his finger. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Measuring," the boy said. "For what?" "For how long things stay." The schoolmaster sat beside him. "Do you know where you're going?" The boy looked at the wall. "I know where I've been." "And where is that?" The boy pointed to the seam between bricks. "There." The schoolmaster touched the wall. It was cool and different. "Do you remember before?" The boy said nothing. In the chapel, Sister Genevieve lit a candle and whispered, "Let him be placed where he can be understood." The flame flickered, then steadied. Outside, the train exhaled steam like a sigh too old to be comforted. The boy watched it leave, then turned and walked back into the corridor, his steps silent, his shadow long. The justice of the peace, a man who believed in the dignity of contradiction, began collecting statements. He called it due diligence, though he knew the truth rarely arrives by appointment. He interviewed the midwife, who spoke of pulses that traveled elsewhere. He interviewed the schoolmaster, who described suns that predicted rain. He interviewed the farmer, who spoke of weightless bundles and tally marks. He interviewed Sister Genevieve, who said, "He obeys, but not because he believes." He interviewed a child who claimed the boy whispered a future that came true in another county. He interviewed a pastor who insisted the boy never spoke at all. He wrote each testimony in a ledger that had never disagreed with itself, but now the ink began to blur. The pages felt damp, as if the truth had begun to sweat. "Consensus? None," he wrote. He paused, dipped his pen again, and added, "Coherence? Troubling." He stared at the word troubling until it began to resemble truth. One evening he invited the boy to his office. The boy sat in the chair reserved for witnesses. "Do you know what people say about you?" the justice asked. The boy nodded. "Do you care?" The boy looked at the window. "They are trying to explain themselves, not you." "No," the boy said. "Me is only the question." The justice leaned forward. "Are you dangerous?" The boy tilted his head. "Only to certainty." The justice closed the ledger. "I cannot place you." The boy stood. "Then you have placed me." Outside, the wind moved papers on the desk. The justice watched them flutter, then settle. He did not chase them. Some truths, he knew, prefer to be left where they land. Winter returned with its usual authority. The snow fell in paragraphs. The cold made people philosophical. The town divided itself into camps. The practical insisted on diagnosis, a nervous derangement, a rare fever, a failure of development. The faithful sharpened scripture into questions. Was he a sign, a test, a warning? The folk keepers resurrected old words: fetch, changeling, second sight. A young man from Montpelier arrived with books about cranial maps. He measured the boy's head with calipers that gleamed like surgical insects. "Calculation is overdeveloped," he said. "Benevolence is uncertain." A woman who had lost 3 children said, "He is a question asked by someone I don't know." The schoolmaster wrote in his journal, "Theories are scaffolding, but what if the building refuses to be built?" The boy sat by the window watching frost erase his fingerprints. "Do you feel cold?" Sister Genevieve asked. "I feel what cold does," he replied. She touched his hand. It was neither warm nor cold. It was simply present. In the church, the pastor preached on mystery. "Not all things are meant to be solved," he said. "Some are meant to be witnessed." The congregation nodded, but uneasily. Outside, the boy walked through snow that did not hold his steps for long. The wind followed him, but did not catch him. The theories continued. They filled pages. They filled rooms. They filled silences. But the boy remained unfilled. In late January, the town decided to test the impossible. They locked the schoolhouse and left the boy inside with a lantern, bread, water, and the slate. Snow fell hard, editing the town into a draft. They agreed to return at first light. At dawn, the door was still locked from the outside. Inside, the boy sat at the desk, awake. On the slate, 3 tally marks and a line drawn to the doorframe at a precise height. The schoolmaster recognized the measurement. It matched a chalk mark he had made for another boy, now buried. He opened the door wider than necessary, as if apologizing. The boy stood, walked past him, and said nothing. The schoolmaster whispered, "We wanted to understand." The boy paused. "You wanted to confirm." "Confirm what?" "That I am not yours." The schoolmaster touched the doorframe. The line was faint but present. He turned to the pastor. "We tested him." The pastor nodded. "And he tested us." That night, the schoolmaster dreamed of a room with no doors, only measurements. He woke with his hand on his chest, as if trying to find a pulse that had moved. By spring, the decision was no decision at all. They would keep him and not keep him, teach him and not teach him, love him and not know how. He moved between houses like weather. He brought no harm. He left a trail of puzzled tenderness. One morning he was gone. Not lost. Gone. No prints. No note. Only an absence shaped exactly like him. In the clerk's ledger, the placeholder remained. 3 marks leaning toward a margin. Years later, someone penciled beside them. Returned. Then erased the question mark. The schoolmaster kept the slate. The pastor kept the sermon he never gave. The midwife kept the mirror. The farmer's wife kept the quilt. The boy kept nothing. Perhaps truth is not what we agree upon. Perhaps truth is what remains after our agreements fade. Perhaps memory is the only science that refuses to be satisfied. We want the world to confess. The world, like the child, often points elsewhere. In the end, the boy was not explained. He was not solved. He was not claimed. He was not named. He was witnessed. And perhaps that is enough. We build ledgers to hold what we fear will vanish. We build walls to hold what we fear will wander. We build stories to hold what we fear will not speak. But some lives are not meant to be held. They are meant to pass through, to point, to remind, to ask. And in asking, they leave us changed. Not because we understood, but because we tried. And because trying sometimes is the only truth we are allowed. The snow melted. The ledger remained. The tally marks faded, but the question did not. It waits, still, somewhere between the seam and the silence.